Welcome to the Pickleball Guru's newest webinar, What's My Rating? I'm Randy Manaply, and I'm here with Prem Carnot, the Pickleball Guru, author of the best-selling book, Smart Pickleball, and the best coach in the business.
Welcome, Guru Nation.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the skill-based rating, but first we're going to talk about the tournament rating, which I believe went into effect back in January, last January. And this rating system actually goes all the way up to a 6.999. Typically, the skill ratings are 1 to 5. But with the new rating that went into effect, it all goes, and it can even go all the way up to like over 7 if someone just goes on a big winning streak. So we're going to talk about the new rating system, and then we're going to talk about all the skills rating system. So Prem, can you tell us anything about the tournament rating system?
The tournament rating system is uniquely for players who play in tournaments, and it basically sort of evaluates their results. And pertaining to the results, you can be from anywhere from an early, from 1.0 all the way down to 6.99, as you said, to 7. I don't think there's anyone right now in that 6.99 category, but I do think there are a few in the 6-point category who are probably professional players who have chosen to become professional pickleball competitors, and some of the top-notch players are in that rating. But it is basically related to your tournament results.
And depending on the tournament, if it's sanctioned, it means more than a non-sanctioned tournament, is the way I understand it.
I would not be an expert of completely trying to explain to you about sanctioned or non-sanctioned tournament, but I think the understanding is that people who play in a USAPA sanctioned tournament would probably get more points than a tournament which is not approved or by USAPA. But having said that, pretty much I think 80 to 90% of the tournaments run across the country are probably non-sanctioned tournaments.
And I believe the weighting is 100% for an actual sanctioned tournament, which would be the nationals.
Yes.
And then 60% for non-sanctioned. An example of that would be like maybe a club tournament or even the US Open.
That's
right. A non-sanctioned tournament.
That's right. And what makes it a sanctioned and non-sanctioned tournament? It's about getting the approval ratings from approval from the USAPA, which basically means that every tournament, every match is played in a sanctioned tournament will have a dedicated referee, and also the medal matches generally would have also alliance people. And so those are a certain number of regulations, but obviously they also have a liability insurance which is covered by the USAPA if you're part of the sanctioned tournaments. Non-sanctioned tournaments, depending on the number of people you have, and sometimes you don't really have enough referees, which basically forces the tournament director to sort of go the other way, because it's easier to organize when players make their own scores, or at least when they call their own scores when they're playing tournaments. So that makes it easier in a way for a lot of tournament directors, which is understandable, and so that makes it the variation of sanctioned and non-sanctioned tournament.
And since we're talking about tournament directors, I believe it's under the obligation of the tournament director to submit the tournament information for you and your partner, as well as all the other players in the tournament. You just can't call up the USAPA and say you were 3 out of 5 in a men's doubles 4.0, can you?
No, absolutely not. And generally, all the tournament results are submitted to the USAPA for you to be able to be rated, even if it's at 60%.
And just to further complicate matters, your rating is different if you're men's or women's, and mixed, and certainly singles. I think you said you were like a 1.0. You're rated as a 1.0 singles player right now or something like that?
Well, it's probably a joke. I'm not a singles player. But yes, each one is weighted differently depending on the type of competitions you play and your partners you play with and the opponents you play against, and win or lose. has different different weightage to the impact of your rating. So it's it's a not a complicated system, but it'll take some time for everything to settle in. Right now, it's still on the. It's not. I would say it's on the works, but it's still because every tournament is now being sort of put into place, and the datas are being collected. So sometimes a very good player, I know a certain player who had won multiple national championship, ends up becoming a 4.0 player or a 4.5 player in the official rating. But I think over time that'll be sort of settles into a good level. I mean, it might take a few years, but it will probably find its groove.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about how it needs time for data to be collected and everything, because I know someone that checked and they're a 3.678 in women's, but a 2.75 in mixed. And that's kind of proof positive that these ratings are strictly based on tournament wins and not on individual skill.
That's right. And as I said, it's all weighted differently. This type of people, partners you play with, and it's also the type of competitions you win. And more obviously, better players or better competition you play against and win against would probably weigh more against players, of your same level, I would say.
And so here's how all this came to be. There is a Hungarian American physics professor at Marquette University named Arpad Emmerich, and he was the best chess player in Milwaukee. And he's the guy that came up with the ELO system for rating chess players. And for a long time, he did it all by himself because there's only 2,000 players that he was tracking. And the ELO system was mainly made for two-player games, like the aforementioned chess, and that has gone on to other fields. And he's the guy that developed the algorithm for this. And so we can thank Arpad Emmerich for developing
That's
the
incredible.
system that we're using and waiting for all the data to come in.
That's fantastic. I mean, I don't know much about it. I do play recreational chess here and there, but I wouldn't say that I knew anything about ratings.
Yeah, something tells me you're not submitted in any type of chess ratings whatsoever, Prem. And just to be clear, all these tournament ratings are not a skill-based rating. This is a tournament rating, and as we mentioned, it no longer goes to 5. It goes all the way up to 6.5 with the possibility of going past 7 in case someone just goes on a tear. And in case you were wondering, it goes up to multiple decimal places. I kind of talked about that a second ago. You'll see 3, and you can round down instead of up. For example, if your tournament rating is 3.999, you're rated as a 3.5. You can still play up, but you can certainly also play at your rating at 3.5. Praying, keeping in mind this is just for tournaments, is this system good, bad, or does it really matter since it's only for tournaments?
It's a good system for tournaments for sure. There's a lot of players who compete who would like to really match up and find out where they are in their skill levels, but also their spurs where they are compared to their peers. And for people who want to compete and want to know exactly where they are, it's a system which works its out through, and it'll be an effective one in a few years. Just so be patient about it.
So that's the tournament rating system, but there is still a skill-based system, and that is put out by the IFP.
It's really put by the USAPA. I think
Okay.
IFP is just only an extension of that
Okay.
branch. But having said that, IFP or USAPA, either way, basically the idea of the whole skill basis goes back to for someone trying to figure out what their ratings are, and getting an idea of what their skill levels are, so that they can, if they're playing in a local club, even if they're not competitive players, if they're playing in a league or in a club match, just certain clubs have different nominations for players of different skill sets, or it's been separated that way. So for people like that, if they want to figure out where they are, it's USAPA or IFP has a system in place. So you do a basic number of things you are a certain level, then it's pretty basic. I wouldn't say that it is elaborate, but if you do a certain number of things, you get you are a certain level player. That's basically how it's defined, and then obviously it goes from all the way down from from a 2.0 player all the way down to 5.0. By the time you are declared or seen as a 5.0 player, that means you do a certain number of things consistently well.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with the skill-based ratings. Um, we'll go really quick through 1.0 to 2.0. 1.0 to 2.0, you're pretty new to the game.
Yeah, pretty much. At that point, you're really trying to figure out your scoring system because I always say that in pickleball, at least the most complex one is probably the scoring system. It's not complex, but at least when you're coming in, it's really sort of you're confused about how to keep a score because there's these three numbers which are being coded all the time, so it confuses a lot of players.
Especially
So
the new players.
especially the new
You
players.
hear that? What's that third number that you keep saying a lot?
Absolutely. Even for a seasoned player like me, when I started it, I was totally confused. Couldn't really understand it. It could be deterring actually for sometimes for players, but basically that's the level you're talking about is basically for players who don't really know how to score and basically have not a consistency of even putting the ball across the net or being able to serve consistently. So they are pretty much what you call your I would say the babies of pickleball,
Newbies. The newbies.
the newbies.
Okay, so let's move on to the 2.0 to the 3.0 players. What's your typical 2.0 to 3.0 player look like, Prem?
A typical 2.0 or 3.0 player would probably a player who already starts understanding the scoring system, who has was able to put certain amount of balls into the court. Like they're able to serve not consistently, but they're able to at least serve more consistently into where they were supposed to serve and able to return balls a little bit more. So it's a number of how would you put that? I think we have a ratings and goal guide which defines that more. So a 2.0 to 2.4 to 3.5 is like they have the basic rules down. But that's one of the important things that they know the rules. Like apart from the scoring system, they know what the non-volley zone line is and where the serve has to land, where the return has to land, and the calls to be made. Um, and so a certain number of things. They know the basic rules. So they're your classic 2.0 to 3.0 player.
And for the 2.0 to 3.0 player, we say also through the 3.5, but typically it's a 2.0 to 3.0 player. They need work on fundamentals.
Basics, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. The fundamentals are very, very important for them to develop into a better player. We do have a ratings and goals guide, which is free, which you can download from the website.
And I'll
Which
put a link to that in the show notes, by the way.
absolutely, and so which will probably give you an idea on where you are. It's a sort of a very good flow chart. You basically self analyze yourself where you are. And if you do the certain number of things, then you are in a certain level, and if you don't, you know what your flowchart will bring you back to whichever level it is defined to, and then from that point of view, we also give you a certain number of suggestions and tips and drills for you to be able to move to that next ladder.
And typically for the 2.0, 2.5, one of the things you recommend is working on getting serves and returns, not just in, but also deeper.
Absolutely. As you become a better player, serves and return of serves are important part of the game because they are pretty much your starting part of the game, and getting them consistently and deeper. At the beginning when you don't really know, you're trying to just get the ball in. It's one thing, but then once you start getting more consistent, getting the ball deeper and making your opponent play a little bit more, complicating your opponent's job is basically the idea of the early shots to be more consistent with it.
And since we're talking about those early shots, one of the things that people seem to get excited about when you give your opening talk at the clinic, you say, I'm going to show you how to win the point in the first three shots.
That's right. Because those first three shots can pretty much determine the way you play it, and you can so win. I mean, you're not going to ace someone with a serve on a pickleball. It's not tennis, unfortunately. It's a plastic ball with holes. It travels a lot slower than people think, but the element of it when you receive a serve, a very good effective deep serve could be as effective as an ace in tennis, and that would help you sort of set up your game for someone who's serving. And the same way with the return, a very ideal good deep return would complicate the way your opponents are going to hit the third ball, which makes it easier to assess. So there's each of these shots will allow you to. That's why in clinic we talk about how you can set up yourself so that you can win those points easily.
Excellent. And we have clinics coming up throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, there's going to be a link to that down in the show notes also. So come out and check out a clinic. They're typically 2 days. We'll have a link to all the clinics in the show notes, but just to let you know, we have Richmond coming up on May 12th and 13th, Charlotte, North Carolina, August 25th and 26th, Denver, Colorado, September 22nd and 23rd, Sacramento, California, October 6th and 7th, Tucson, Arizona, November 10th and 11th.
That's great. People really have a lot of fun with these clinics, and I'm sure anyone who has been here in these clinics in the past will be the perfect testimonial of what they do. And you want to check out all the people who have already shared their views, you can definitely go to our website, the Pickleball Guru, and it'll give you a lot more of what people say about their experiences in the clinics.
All right, so that's the 2.0 to 3.0 players. Now we're kind of here where the rubber meets the road, as they say, the 3.0 to 3.5 players. This comprises like the bulk of all players throughout the U.S. Somewhere between 60 to 80% of all players are 3.0 to 3.5 players.
That's right. That would be my guess.
And basically, and this is very basic, if you're a 3.0, you're getting most of your returns and serves in, you know how to keep score, you know the basic rules, but there's maybe not a whole lot of strategy or shot selection. And I'm not saying to get more people at boot camp since we asked for 3.0 to 4.0 players. What I am saying is the most important part of being a 3.0 is getting those serves and returns in.
Yes, a good trio player will definitely start getting more and more consistent with their balls and being able to return and start, getting even a few drop shots in. Not always consistent, but they are starting to understand that and the effectiveness of it, and so they'll try working on it. But that's the early stages of a 3-0 to 3-5 player. When they get into the 3-5, it's a little bit more different already.
Yeah, so tell us more about what a 3.0 and a 3.5 player looks like, Prem. We know about the serves and returns getting in. What else can we say about the 3.0 and 3.5 players?
I think the 3-5 player already starts understanding, the special rules, the special case rules. When I mean special case rules, is a special rule outside the rules of pickleball? Not really, but there are certain rules which are not already familiar from a 3.0 to under. No one probably understands those rules or not have seen it or probably experienced it or even heard about it. But by the time you
Can
start,
you give us an example, like bouncing on the crossbar or something like that?
yes, like a ball which spins back
Mhm.
back onto your own court, and then what you do about it, is it your ball, or is their point, or your opponent's point, things like that. But also certain shots like the Ernie shot, where some of your opponents don't take the non-volley zone or the kitchen as anymore as an hindrance to them or an obstacle. They jump across they fly over the kitchen line
But just to
and
be clear,
volley.
you don't have to do an Ernie shot to be a 3.5.
No,
You just have to know the rule to do an Ernie shot.
that's right. And
Okay.
most of them probably understand it. At
Mhm.
that point, they understand, they've seen it or have heard of it, or understand that there's something called an Ernie shot or an ATP, which is the around the pole shot. All those, I don't think they execute it, but they at least have an understanding those rules exist, and a few things like that, and are more aware that those are possibilities of shots outside the fundamental basic rules we've known. And they're much more consistent. I mean, the 3-5 player is, they start getting a little bit more consistent. They start building up points. They start building rallies. They're able to get, at least 30% of their drop shots in, and at least they will try to do a little bit more drop shots at that point, and be more consistent with it.
And looking at your ratings and goals guide, one of the things you note is basically if you don't try to hit a third shot, if you don't try to hit a drop shot, you're probably a 3.0. If you sometimes try and do the drop shot, then you're probably a 3.5.
You're moving towards that area for
Yeah.
sure. No doubt about that.
And the other things that you look at when you look at the 3.0 and the 3.5 is you're more strategic about where you hit the ball.
The 3.5, at least they start knowing where to exactly move the ball. They're at least more in control of their shots. At least they have an awareness, but also the skill set to start moving the ball around, which is a little bit more consistent than a 3-0 player, and have an awareness of the court and start moving. They might not be executing it always, but they at least have an awareness of it and start at least applying it into their game, which slowly and slowly will trickle them, if they keep working on it, to the next level.
And this is where, certainly when you're moving up, this means that your arsenal of skills and shots, they're building upon each other as you're moving up.
For sure, and the most important part I often say is that the basic differences, from that particular point onwards to a 5-0 player is not really how skill sets, is how you build those consistency factors. The more and more you get consistent, and less you make errors, you become a better player. And at that point, I think the skill levels are pretty much even in terms of knowing how to execute it and being able to execute it. But then it comes down to how much you can do it. Do you do it 10 out of 10? If you're doing it 10 out of 10, then you're probably one of the top-notch players or the 5-0 player. If you're doing it 6 out of 10, you're probably around about the 4-0 level. And, and if you're doing further lower than that, then you're probably in the 3-5 category. So I think that's basically there. The 4-5 would probably be in between the 6 and the 10, somewhere in between the 7 and 8s. So that's basically how it goes in terms of understanding the strategy. 3-5 will start on applying the strategies a little bit more consistently. They're not as consistent as a 4-0 player, but they are definitely consistent.
Typically, we've had some comments from people that have come to boot camps. They thought our boot camps were just for like 4.0 and plus players. But these are the people that typically come to boot camps, our 3.0 and our 3.5 players. That being said, if you want to talk about one of our Tucson participants that has actually moved up, he came to 2 boot camps, but he probably moved up a full point at this point.
Yes, he has. It is true, and I'm not saying that I would guarantee you that, but I definitely know for sure that most of the bootcamp participants post bootcamp, the skill sets generally improve at least a half a point from wherever they were, and make a really good stride. And now this gentleman you're talking about is a competitive player, and so that's his. It was his goal to reach there, and he has made it there, and he probably will be able to move a little bit more. But I've been also very honest and straightforward with him, telling him that you're probably not at your pinnacle, but you've got probably a few more steps, but not overshoot his ambition, but be very clear that where he can move to the next level. And I think he's very he's very he has a self-assesses himself to understand that that would probably be a level which he can aspire for from the 4 where he is.
Yeah, and they have where he is in Tucson. They have a very stringent requirement to be moved into the 4.0, and you have to score. I think he said you had to score 25 points
Out of the 33.
out of 33, and he actually scored 33 points on his 4.0 skill level test that he had. He was very excited about that.
Yeah, definitely, because I think people who come through these boot camps definitely have a great experience, but also what I see importantly happening is they get confident about their skill sets and their understanding of their skill sets. And during boot camps, we spend an enormous amount of time to try and hone their skills, but also give them a lot of repetition so that they're consistent with their it's all about repetition. When you want to get consistent, you had to keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you get better. The best analogy I often say is like, and I say that in the clinics where you're driving a car today, you merge on a highway with no problem at all. But when you first started probably driving the car, I'm probably the first one to tell you how nervous I was when I was getting onto to merge on a highway and seeing all these speeding cars and trucks going by. It scared the hell out of me. um, and I was doing it on a scooter, I think, and so that was my early days. But now, obviously, I don't even think about it. You're probably, talking to someone on your hands-free phone, obviously, as you merge into a highway and you change lanes with no problem because it's become part of your muscle memory. So it's basically the same idea. It's like more repetition makes you a better player simply just because you get consistent with it. And the idea is here not to be if you're a competitive player or not. It's the idea is everyone wants to go to pickleball and have fun, but also be able to be consistent so that they don't feel like they have let themselves or let their partners down because they haven't been able to consistently play at a level which would allow them to enjoy a game of pickleball. But just remember, it's only pickleball.
It's only pickleball. For the boot camps, and just to let you know, Prem talks about all the repetitions and all the drills and everything. Um, for example, we have a whole session on the drop shot, a whole session on net play, a whole session on playing against bangers, the whole session on strategy, dancing with your partner, and I think 3 other sessions that go on. So it's over the course of 3.5 days, at least 15 hours of coaching. Typically, we run anywhere between
25
20.
to 28, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If the participants want to stick around, we'll keep playing and hanging out with you guys. Um, but yeah, if you're really interested in improving your game, you want to come to the best boot camp that's available out there, and that's Prame's. Yep, we are about to start a boot camp. While we're recording this, we're about to start a boot camp actually tomorrow. And then we have a sold out boot camp in Vero Beach on February 14th. We're sold out in Costa Rica in April. We have 4 spots left in the one in Richmond on May 15th through the 18th. And then we're off to Charlotte, August 28th, Denver, September 25th, Sacramento, October 9th, Tucson, November 13th. And then we also have the ones for 2021 back up for Vero Beach, January 8th, January 22nd, and February 5th. So we've already got everything set up for 2021.
We're only in January. So you better have to pull those places up very quickly because it does go fast.
They do go fast, and
And we only invite 8 people.
and there's only 8 people that come to these. I know a lot of other boot camps, they go 16, 24 people with multiple instructors, but our ratio is 8 to Prane. Um, and that way you get all the individualized attention and it focuses on your game. You're not going to get lost in the shuffle. And just as an example about how it focuses on your game, one of the sessions is the one-on-one where you'll spend, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour
Yes.
giving a person homework and specifically telling this person what this person needs to do, not just generally what you need to do in the world of pickleball.
Yeah, I think a lot of the testimonials we receive from past participants to basically say how much they relish that one-on-one session. It's sort of like a topping. It's like a cherries on top of cream type of expression.
When I first got into pickleball, I read his book, and that was very, very helpful. And then I listened to your podcast, and I just like his relaxed manner, the way he sort of approaches it. And the other thing is that this is a small group. I mean, for 3, 4 days now, having just, well, it's normally 8, I suppose, you get a lot of attention from him. I've done other lessons with other people, but he talks about the why. We talked about that earlier today. He talks about the why as much as he talks about the what and how. And I think that's important too, to understand why you're doing things.
Say how much you relish that one-on-one session. It's sort of like a topping. It's like a cherries on top of cream type of expression they use for like it's just topping off everything all they have as an experience. That adds a good plus for them.
Links to all the boot camps are down in the show notes, and we'll also have some contact information, some more information towards the end. But let's get back to the rating system. So we're up to the 4.0 player. What separates a 4.0 player from a 3.5 player, Prem?
I think it's again a question of consistency. They know the special rules, but they also are able to execute not all of them consistently, but they're able to execute some of those special rules, which I said, like the Ernie shot or the round the pole shot. They're able to execute it. They have an understanding of it, but I don't think they're as consistent as a 4-5 player. They're definitely getting more drop shots in. They probably have a lot more control. They are starting understanding the court strategies, the court geometry, and starting to actually really have fun.
And one of the things that I notice about once you start playing with 4.0s, all those winners that you were getting against the 3.0s and 3.5s, they're no longer winners. They're all coming back to you.
Yes, that's one thing which I learned the hard way myself, but I think most of you do. And as you improve as a player, that things which you were not accomplished in the past, and now all of a sudden you're in a range of players who are able to get every ball back, or at least more and more you start going to the higher levels, more difficult it is to just put away a ball. It's just they have a good understanding of the court, so it makes it easier for them to retrieve every ball. So if you're admiring a shot after hitting a winner, thinking that it's going to be a clean winner, you might be for a big surprise because as the levels grow up, those people are able to pick more balls than you can ever imagine.
And would you also say that the 4.0 players, they have more skills in their arsenal? They have more bigger shot selection than the other than the 3.5s and the 3.0s?
They do have some more variety in their games, and they are in the serves or in the return of serves. They're not always, or depending on one type of, they're not like a one-stroke pony type of thing. They have multiple of things. They have an understanding of it more, and are able to utilize it. Not as consistently yet, but they are able to utilize it in a more in a way, in a better way than generally the lower end players would be able to.
Now let's talk about the 4.5 players. And let's go ahead and group these two together, the 4.5s and the 5.0s. This is once you're starting to get into these levels, obviously you've mastered everything. They're more consistent than the 4.0 player. That's one of the things that separates them. But this is also the part where athletic ability may come into play.
It can. I've seen players who are in the 4-5 or in the 5-0 category are not as athletic as you would want to think of, athletes per se. I've seen 70-year-olds, 60-year-olds, and even 80-year-olds who are able to be wonderful players simply because they know how to be on a court and know how to actually execute shots and be smart about their short selections, which allows them to be much more aware of where they place themselves. 4-5, 5-0 players already understand a lot about their positioning, a lot about their shots. They are extremely good with their drop shots, have a lot of variety in their serves and return of serves, know how to move the ball around, have a very good understanding of where their opponents are so that they can move the ball around. So what does it make a difference between a 4-5 and a 5-0 basically is, again, it comes down to the bottom line, comes down to the consistency. Someone like a 4-5 player would probably be able to hit, I don't know, on a rough head would be able to hit, just say 50 dinks in a row. I'm just throwing out a number. It's not exhaustive to that, but like a 5-0 player would probably be able to do that consistently with 100 balls, 100 dinks. So something like that, which basically comes down to consistency and unforced errors are being lessened, and which basically comes down to the number of number of errors you make and number of errors you don't make, and between the 4-0, 4-5 and a 5-0, basically it comes down to how many more errors you make, and by the time you reach a 5-0, higher level players, you're pretty much talking about people having very few errors, and most of the times you're probably looking at forced errors and unforced errors. I'm sure there's an article we wrote about forced and unforced errors.
Yeah, there is. I think there's a podcast that we have out too on it. And just to talk about a philosophical difference that you may have with your ratings and goals guide versus the USAPA skill-based rating. At the skill-based rating at the 4.5 level, it says you serve with power and accuracy and can also vary the speed and spin of the serve. The key word that I'm picking up on there is power. Yeah.
Having said, it's not really a philosophical difference. I think everyone does have a power serve at that point. I think more and more you go to the highest level, they might have that as an option in the back of their pocket, which is a good thing. But I don't think that's the consistency. It's not the defining factor for most high-end players. They don't try to go for power serves. They would probably they have more what you would call a safe serve, which is high and deep, and safely. That's basically what they're looking for. They are trying to keep it to the third quadrant, or the close to the baseline type of serves, and generally don't have to try and hit it hard. They don't really do. There are a few players who do.
Tyson.
Dyson does, and
Mhm.
there are a few others. And
Yeah.
but having said that, that's not what we consistently go for. So power is not. I definitely don't believe that at that level, players actually use power as their power serve as their big arm or tool in their arsenal. But they do have those. Almost every one of them has them, and will mix it up. They have variety in their game, but they will probably remain more consistent with their thing. In tennis, you have, if you miss the first serve, hard serve, you always go back to what you call the second serve, which is basically a little bit more loopier and more completely sure that you're going to land it in. I think most high-end players would, since we don't really have an ace, we just only have one, we have only one serve to go with, would probably not go for that type of acing serve, but they will probably go for like the second serve type, trying to keep the ball in play.
And what I'm hearing a lot with this is there's a consistency theme
Yes.
that you're coming up with all this. And I forget who said it. It may have been Mark Renison, but the line is anyone can make a 5.0 shot. It's whether or not you can consistently make those 5.0 shots.
Well, kudos to Mark about it.
If he's the one that said it, like I said, I can't remember.
Irrelevant of it. I mean, if it's Mark, I'm sure Mark would have said something like that. Or DJ Howard or any one of them would have said that. But irrelevant of it, I do believe that consistency is the most important factor in the levels you play and the levels you aspire to be.
So there's a few regional differences when it comes to the skill sets. For example, like 5.0 in Florida and Arizona may be a little bit better than a player in another state that may not have as much pickleball that goes on in it.
It is. It is true. Different regions, like as you said, yeah, a 5-0 in Vermont would probably not be a 5-0 in Arizona or in Florida. That's simply because he's probably the best player out there at that point. Um, it's like being a big fish in a small pond, irrelevant how big the pond is, um, and um, and then being a small fish in a in a in a in in a big pond. In Arizona or in Florida, where there's much more competitive or just a lot more play happening in those areas, in those states. When the level of players are there, there's probably a lot more players in a certain category of level of players, a skill set level of players, which basically they play against each other, and obviously all their games get better and they get more consistent. And someone who's playing, in a state or in a place which does not have a lot of players, they might be the biggest fish out there, but they are probably the biggest fish out there. But when they come back into a place like Florida or Arizona or California or Washington State, they probably feel themselves so small, and then they have to restart over again. But having said that, I mean, in a competitive rating and the tournament rating system, this is all will even out generally, because if those players are playing in the competitive realm, automatically if they have results coming along with their thing, they would probably be able to patch up that differences. A good example is a gentleman like a player like Adam Stone out of Texas. He's definitely a big fish out there in Texas, and but luckily for him, he was able to get into the tournament circuit. And when I first saw him, I knew he was that type of material. And but luckily for him, he was able to start competing in the highest levels and be able to play with other best, brush his shoulders with other best players out there, and enhance his game also, and improve his work. But if he had stuck where he was, he would have probably been a bigger switch, but not having improved his game. But I think his game has come tremendously well since then, because he was exposed to other players. So it is coming through in the tournament circuit. Let me be very clear. It's coming through in the tournament circuit, but in the recreational play, there's still a lot of disparity. Someone who considers themselves a better player in one place, and you go and meet them, and then you realize they're not as good as they hope to be.
Or that's why you always say, if you really want to move up, increase your level of gameplay, the thing to do is practice and play with and against better players.
Absolutely, get yourself exposed to better players wherever you can and possibly do. It'll always improve your game. There's no doubt about that. It's like anything else. Like if you're driving in a small little neighborhood, and you're used to that sort of comfort, then that's fine. But if you want to become a better driver, you go down to Rome, as an example. It's a whole new experience. Chaotic driving would allow you to understand a little bit more and more, have a sense of awareness, and the type of quality of driver you have to be in a place like that. So yeah, it definitely helps to expose yourself as much as possible. I definitely recommend you for players who really, really want to hone their skill and improve, outside going to clinics and boot camps from professionals. I would definitely recommend you to look at, go down to a neighboring town or a place where there are probably a bit of bigger players who can challenge you and make you a better player. Again, this is mostly for players who really want to improve and hone their skill and become better players, irrelevant if they want to be competing or not. It's just want to be able to enjoy their time on a pickleball court, and that happens by just improving, and irrelevant of what skill level that is.
So that's the skill-based rating as well as a tournament rating. If you're interested in more about the ratings, go to pickleballguru.com, where you can sign up for Prem's newsletter. And when you sign up for Prem's newsletter, you will receive a copy of your ratings and goals guide,
For
which is
free.
for free. A nice simple flow chart that'll tell you it's a bunch of yes or no questions. Yes, if you're doing this, you're this level. No, if you're not doing this, then you're probably this level. While at the website, you can check out our gear page where you can get a Smart Pickleball t-shirt. Tell them what your shirt actually says, because you always bring this up at clinics, Prem.
Well, because probably people don't see it, but I will probably read it to you. It says, "I like to play smart pickleball," but on the bottom is a wonderful line which says, "And sometimes I actually do." Isn't it true that most of us want to really play really smart pickleball, and sometimes we might do it?
And sometimes we might do it. So at our gear page, you can get a Smart Pickleball t-shirt. There's also lots of other t-shirts, like the Pickleball Heartbeat t-shirt that I have here. There's also some Guru caps. Prem actually had his stolen, which shows how high demand they are. Otherwise, he'd show you one of his hats. And while at the website, you can certainly sign up for a clinic or a boot camp. If you decide to go for a boot camp, if you register by Sunday, use code WEBINAR and you'll receive $500 off your boot camp. And I think the last thing on my list, Prane, we talked about, I think we mentioned that you're the author of the best-selling book, Smart Pickleball, but you also have another book out, Drop Till You Drop,
Yes, absolutely.
which is all about the drop shot.
It is, and it's also one of the sessions we do in the boot camp. It's a sort of a detailed explanation of the drop shot, the mechanics. Obviously, a lot of these things would be a great experience if you're able to be on a court with me and be able to demonstrate and practice that. Having said that, that's the next best thing you can have is a book which will give you all the details, the mechanics, and visuals for you to be able to know where to hit the ball, how to strike it, and what are the mechanics involved on it, and where do you target it, and what do you do when you don't really hit a good drop shot, and everything else. It's a fun read, and hope you will enjoy it.
All right, excellent. That's all I have. I'm going to put our contact information as well as other information about boot camps and clinics coming up. So other than that, I have to say thank you, Guru Nation, and hope to see y'all on the courts. Prem?
Well, thank you, Guru Nation, again, and my parting words, as usual, is go have fun on a pickleball court, and remember, it's only pickleball.
It's only pickleball. Thank you so much.